let's get down to it. Stephen King's It came out a couple of weeks back. I saw it Tuesday, Wednesday, earlier in the week, and that was pretty good. Not a perfect film. There are some minor problems I had with it, but overall, thought it was really, really good, and actually a whole lot better than I thought it would be. Alright, now before I get into reviewing the film and giving an analysis and kind of a heads up of where the sequel might be going, first off, your takeaway from the movie, I think, hinges a lot on whether or not you read the original novel. So if you read the novel and you watched the movie, I think you're probably going to get a whole lot more out of the experience than people who didn't read the novel and went into it because you kind of know the backstory already. And you're trying to find those little subtle cues, those small patches from the book that are put in the movie that didn't make it into the 1990 miniseries. So obviously, depending on your prior experiences with the franchise and the IT brand, you're going to have different takeaways. So I think, just from a perspective of the guy who's read the book and seen the miniseries, you kind of go into it looking for the really small, sort of trivial things that are kind of under the radar. And there were some pretty good, little subtle homages in there to the novel. A lot of Easter eggs. Perhaps the first time in movie history, literal Easter eggs from the book are actually in the movie. So that was pretty cool. So, I don't know, I think if you never saw the original miniseries of 1990, or if using that as a gauge of how you want to interpret or rank the quality of this book, or not book, my bad, the movie, I don't know, we can go back and forth. We'll get into comparing the movie to the miniseries towards the end of the video. But I think even if you look at it as a standalone movie, it has an entirely different vibe than the miniseries. It feels more a creation of its times. I mean, obviously the comparison to Stranger Things are unavoidable. I've never seen that show, so I don't know. But to me, it felt more like The Goonies or something like that, like a really sort of, child-driven action-adventure from a bygone era. So that is something you really don't see a whole lot of in movies nowadays. So that was pretty cool. I mean, it really was kind of more like Stand By Me than I think the original 1990 miniseries. I think it was overall positive. So all that, just straight into it. Now going into this movie, and the guy who directed it, I forgot his name, but it's like Muschietti or something like that. He only made one real major move for this. It was a film called Mama with Jessica Chastain from 2013. Not really a good movie, to be honest with you, so I kind of had low expectations heading into this one. Of course, you had the original script written by like 3 different people, including Cary Fuqua, whatever his name is, the guy who directed Jane Eyre a couple years back. So that script was really out there, like pushing for like almost an NC-17 rating to be closer to the novel. So I think what we get here is a pretty good happy compromise. It's R-rated, so you got blood, you got guts. I think you got a lot more violence in the movie than you probably anticipated, considering it mostly revolves around children. So going into the movie, I mean, we knew there were a lot of things in the book that weren't going to make it in the movie. I mean, we knew we were going to have a bunch of junior high schoolers running a train on a 12-year-old in the sewer. That wasn't going to happen. Let's see what else wasn't going to happen. The part where the bullies jerk each other off in a junkyard and then have their faces eaten off by leeches. Not going to happen in the movie. The part where Pennywise shows up in the library and does a minstrel show routine and calls Michael the N-word repeatedly. We knew that was not going to happen in this adaptation. So you kind of went into it knowing the really hardcore extreme stuff from the novel wouldn't make it into the movie. But you kind of wondered, just how much will they include? I mean, will they include, the part where, Georgie gets his arm bitten off, or the part where, the bully stabs his dad in the neck with a switchblade? I mean, is that stuff going to make it in the novel? Not the novel, my bad. In the film adaptation of the novel? Well, I think about 15 minutes in, you get a pretty hefty amount of fairly R-rated material. You got kids having their arms bitten off and basically being dragged into sewers and blood getting everywhere. Let's see what else you got. You got lambs having nail guns shoved to their skull, like point blank. You got a scene where a girl has a big old bag of Dookie water dropped on her. I mean, that's pretty edgy stuff for a film a lot of us kind of thought would be kind of watered down. So I'm happy about that. Now, of course, there are some noticeable exclusions from the novel that happen in this movie, but nothing too major, nothing negligible that I think really... to put it another way, I don't think there's anything that was in the original novel that wasn't at least partially referenced in this movie that should have. Like, I think it covered all the bases. I mean, there are things that were excluded, but nothing to really sort of weaken the story or make it, completely untrue to the spirit of the novel. So that was good. Alright, so obviously we got some differences. The novel was written in 1985 and set in 1958. This time around, they've updated it in 1989, and one of my big fears about this movie is whenever you do a period piece like that you try to get it fogged down in like nostalgia, where you're not focusing on the story, you're just trying to use the trapping to your advantage and be like, hey, remember, I don't know, Beetlejuice, or the original Street Fighter. And that's a really cool thing about this movie, that, I'm a big retro gaming guy, is there's just like an entire subplot in the movie about this kid who wants to spend all summer playing Street Fighter. And then he goes to an arcade and he's actually playing Street Fighter, the original one, Part 1, not Street Fighter 2 like most people would do. So as far as the historical anachronisms, kept to a minimum. I mean, it's there, there's really a subplot about New Kids on the Block, which is actually probably the most annoying thing about the entire movie. So, I mean, it does have some referential points. It's anchored, it's playing up that, it's a very nostalgia-driven movie, but it's not running the entire plot. It's all secondary. It's window dressing to the actual plot. And the plot is very, very good. You got some great acting from these kids. And one of the things that I noticed about this movie, and I kind of realized it about 30 minutes in, and by the end of the movie I'm like, wow, this is crazy, is this is pretty much the best Freddy Krueger movie that ever got made. Because it's almost like scene by scene, shot by shot, like a remake of the third Elm Street movie. Because it has the same plot, because you have all these kids who are all troubled, and they got bad stuff going on in their lives. Like their parents are overbearing, or they're getting molested, or they feel guilty about their brother dying, and you have like this supernatural force which creates fantasies that can shapeshift, that knows everything you're afraid of and uses that to take advantage of you. And if you stick together, if you form one cohesive bond, you get superpowers together and you can fight it and kill it. But if you don't stick together, you get separated and he picks you off one by one. I mean, that's literally the plot of Elm Street 3. And I mean, right down to it, you've got the same characters, basically. You've got, the take no BS Tom girl, and you've got, the scraggly-haired kid who doesn't say a whole lot. You got the dork in glasses, probably in Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, you've got even a angry black kid in a gray sweatshirt, just like Kincaid in Elm Street 3. All in this movie. So much. I mean, it's eerily similar to that it feels almost like an unacknowledged, spiritual, unintentional remake. And of course it'd be the best Elm Street movie to remake, so I'm happy about that. So all in all, I mean, it really does feel, I don't know if they really intended to do that, but it honestly does feel like the best Elm Street movie that never got made. It just has that attitude, that ethos. I mean, like, even like the actual scenes where the kids are fighting it feels like Elm Street 3, like they're doing the same things, like they're taking metal poles and shoving them through his gizzards, just like in that movie, and it feels oh so familiar. And like I said, I don't know if that was intentional on the part of the director, or it's just one of those things where it's meant to be an homage, but it really, really feels like a Freddy Krueger movie. If you're a fan of Freddy and you hated the remake like everyone with good taste did, go see this movie. It is pretty much the Freddy Krueger remake we always wanted. This is how you do it. It's a very, very, very good take on the subject, and I was really happy about all that. So yeah, the performance is really, really good considering they're a bunch of kids. I mean, you got your usual cast, and they're all driven by neurosis. You've got the one girl who everybody thinks is a hoe in school, and she's buying tampons in one scene, and then the next there's a giant blood explosion in her bathroom, and you're supposed to pretend like that's not symbolism about anything. Of course, you got the one kid who stutters, and his brother died in the sewer because he got eaten by it. And you got the black kid. Now, okay, this is really, if you read the novel, they did something kind of interesting here. They changed the backstory for the black kid, because in the book, the black kid was his parents. He was like going to a different school, lived on a farm. Okay, this time around, his parents are dead, which kind of creates a time paradox, because I could be wrong. If someone's watching this video, send me an email, make a comment or something. But I could have sworn there was a passage in the movie where the black kid, Mike Hanlon, his grandfather, who's his guardian, said that his parents died in the nightclub fire in 1962. And I'm like, wait a minute, how's that possible? Because that means that the kid would be like 22. If it's set in 1989, that's a huge, huge chronological paradox. But like I said, I could have misheard. But, you know, if they said something else, fill me in, because that's really been aggravating me. So yeah, what they did is they actually kind of flip-flopped him with the fat kid. Yeah, because you had the fat kid, he's like new and mysterious in school, and he's like a town historian. Like he's doing all this research about Pennywise, whereas in, you know, the novel, of course it was different, where, you know, the fat kid was, well, this is just fat kid, and Mike Hanlon was the historian. So they kind of shifted that around. That was pretty interesting. I think it's going to be a good setup for the sequel. But yeah, all the acting is really, really good. I think it does a really good job of capturing the neurosis of the middle school experience, and of course, everything in the movie is a metaphor for puberty and growing up, and, you know, realizing the adult world is corrupt and crooked. And really the kind of same thing with the Elm Street mythos, same general idea. Not really sure if any particular actor stands out. I mean, there are certainly some characters who are more fleshed out than others. Like, they spend a lot of time building up Bill and the redheaded girl. And the rest of the characters, I mean, they do have some time where you kind of figure out what they're afraid of and, you know, what they're all angsty about. There are some weird things in there that wasn't in the novel. Like, in the movie, the Jewish kid, like, his big phobia is like an abstract painting. It's like, what? That's just doesn't make any sense. And he's like a really great lie compared to the rest of the kids. And you got the hypochondriac, and he's got an overbearing mom, and he's afraid of a leper. Cool they included a leper, because I thought that wouldn't be one of the things that got excised, because, you know, in the novel, he's saying some really lecherous things to the kid, which obviously got excised from the movie, but that's another cool thing that happened in the translation. So yeah, some of the kids have more backstory, they're more built up, they have more screen time. And others just kind of left as supporting cast characters where you don't really get a whole lot of exposition or, you know, background on who they are or what they're afraid of. This kind of becomes superficial pieces. And I think maybe the biggest problem with the entire movie, well actually second biggest, we'll get to the biggest problem in a minute, is that obviously they're going to do a sequel. And they did something very interesting here, whereas in the miniseries in the novel, it kept going back and forth in time, right? Where it started off with them as, you know, kids, then it flashed forward to them as adults, and it kept going back and forth, so you had this dueling narrative. Okay, so with that in mind, if they're doing a part 2, you kind of figured they'd have to do a lot of seeding for the sequel, right? Like they'd have to start developing plots early, or kind of give you some sort of indication of where these people are headed in the future. And I mean, you do kind of tease a little bit of that. You got the love triangle with the fat kid and the kid stutters and the redhead girl, where you know is going to be a part of the sequel. You kind of set up the idea that the fat kid's going to be a historian, and there's another thing that's escaped me at the moment. But overall, they don't really kind of do a good job of setting up where these kids are headed. There's no foreshadowing. There's like not even like a couple of you know, hints about maybe where they're headed in the future, like what their careers will be, about where they're headed, you know, about what their lots in life will be like. Like, there's nothing in this novel, or my goodness, I keep messing that up, in this novel adaptation which would give you an idea of where the kids will be in the sequel. Let's put it that way. Like, you know, in the book, you know, Bill ended up being like a famous horror writer because Stephen King always writes himself in his books. There's really nothing in this movie that gives you an idea that he's interested in remotely anything like that. I mean, you got like a Beetlejuice poster on his wall, so maybe he'll be like a big shot movie producer in the next movie. But there's no indication of that. There's no setup for that in the first movie. And same thing with the rest of the characters. You really don't know where they're headed in the future. There's nothing to give you an idea of what their, you know, adult lives will be like. So when you're watching the sequel, and to be honest with you, let's face it, you know, the part with the adults is probably the most boring part of the book. So this is the strongest part. That you don't have those vital callbacks. You can't go back and watch it and piece them together. I think that's, if you're going to do a duology, that's a pretty big error. Like, that's going to come back to haunt them, as far as a plot decision. But anyway, like I said, that still doesn't make the film unenjoyable, because it's, for what it is, it's really good. There's some great scenes. It's very entertaining. The pace is great. It doesn't really drag on. It's like 2 hours and 15 minutes, but it goes by in like 90 minutes. It's very fast. Very good structure, great supporting cast. But here we come to the big problem with the movie, my biggest complaint. and this is going to be heresy to a lot of people, but I don't care. I think the biggest problem with this remake is that it's just not scary. Like, I don't know, there's just something where the clown doesn't feel as menacing. Like, I mean, yeah, I know he's eating people and he's growing like 3,000 teeth and biting the faces off Jews, but at the same time, you know, I just don't feel like that same sense of apprehension. Like, this guy is really, really dangerous. I mean, Bill Skarsgård, I mean, he's a good actor, but he just kind of comes off as a little bit too effete. I mean, Tim Curry, you know, he had persona. He had some gravitas. You know, he felt like he felt like an adult that really didn't care about the kids. He felt like an extension of the town in the miniseries. Whereas in this one, he feels more like an alien force, right? You know, he feels like there's parts of this where he starts trailing off in Swedish for no reason whatsoever. He doesn't feel like an extension of the adult world, which I think is what was kind of the cool part of the miniseries and the novel. It just feels like another like random supernatural force trying to kill kids. And I think that's probably a mistake. I think they should have played it to where the character felt more like it was a part of the adult community. That was more symbolic of, you know, Derry and the community they inhabited. But the character design, you know, he's buck-toothed and he's got like that weird like Alice in Wonderland haircut. You know, wasn't a huge fan of the aesthetics. I mean, he does a pretty good job of being creepy and like trying to like basically groom the kids. Okay, let's put it up. There's no other way around it. The clown in this movie is like a child predator. I mean, that's the way his persona is. That's the way they kind of set him this way. The dialogue is, the way he looks at the kids, his verbiage. I mean, that's just what they're trying to get across. I mean, that's just really, it's unsettling in that regard. But at the same time, he doesn't come off as physically intimidating. Like, you know, with Pennywise the Clown, you know he's smarter than the kids. You know he's more powerful than the kids. You know, you really feel like he's a menace. He's smarter than the kids. He knows how to take advantage of them easier. Whereas in this one, he kind of feels unsure, uncertain. Like, as soon as he, like, enters the fray, you're like, nope, not doing it. I just don't think he's as good as Tim Curry. I think Tim Curry was more nuanced. He brought more authority to the role. And I'm not saying it's a terrible performance, but just one I thought was a little bit underwhelming considering the character was supposed to be, like, really, really in tune with the kids' lives and their culture and be a symbolic manifestation of the adult world waiting them. Whereas in this movie, it's just not there. So there's that. I don't know. I think that's pretty much the gist of it. I think it's a really, really good movie overall. It's cool seeing all the shout-outs to the original novel, like the story about, you know, the Easter egg explosion, where you had the CGI like zombie running around without a head. That was pretty funny. There's actually like a weird reference to the turtle, like in the novel. Okay, about the sequel, we'll get into that to conclude the video, about how everything is going to play out. There's a part where like the fat kid finds a turtle while they're skinny dipping. Or not skinny dipping, they're in their underwear and swimming, and I don't know, if you're John Podesta, you'll probably love this scene. So they're doing that, and they find a turtle, and of course that's a hark back to the novel, because in the novel, the turtle saves everybody. So, I mean, it was cool catching those little tidbits that weren't really in the miniseries. So I'll give them my props for that. And one, again, is a very, very entertaining movie. Probably my favorite horror movie come out so far this year, but then again, not like there's been a whole much competition. Alright, so overall, very, very good outing. I'd give it probably like a B+. Very, very, very solid. A lot better than I probably thought it was going to be. But I am kind of concerned about the setup for the sequel because, you know, if you read the novel, you watch the miniseries, you know the adult passages are kind of the dragging part. Like, they don't have as much weight to them as the adult, and they don't really feel as satisfying. All the kid stuff is set up, all the adult stuff is basically denouement. So, heading into this one, I don't know. Clearly, they're setting up Henry Bowers to be a sub-villain. Like, he's going to go after Mike Hanlon because he knocked him down in the sewer when he was like 12. So they're updating it from 1989 to like, what, 2019. So, I don't know. I'm trying to see if there's anything they would do differently than what they did in the miniseries. Other than just, you know, put it in the modern world and take advantage of recurrent trappings. Beyond that, I really can't think of them doing anything too radical. So, of course, in the novel and the miniseries, a Jewish kid dies, and Mike Hanlon stays in Derry and becomes a historian. I'm kind of feeling that in the sequel they'll flip-flop that, so the fat kid, Ben, will be the historian, and maybe, I don't know, Ben will go out and be like a cattle multi-billionaire rancher or something like that. They're obviously kind of setting up the love triangle with the fat kid and the redhead girl and Bill. But again, they didn't really give you a whole lot of foreshadowing for what they're going to be doing as adults. So they'll probably just make something up. And there's some good scenes, I guess, in the adult world. With probably the Chinese restaurant was memorable. But I just don't see the sequel really having as much impact as the original, because it's one of those things where when you're a kid, you can kind of like give the kid people a little bit more credit, because you're only like 12 and you really don't have common sense yet. You're not sure how to interact with the world, and yeah, you'll do stupid stuff like read a book about exploded children and then see an Easter egg and follow it. I mean, this entire movie kind of hinges on the idea of people doing really stupid, impulsive things, which works because the cast are kids. When they're 35 and doing really, really asinine things, just begging to get killed, I don't know, this doesn't have the same impact. I mean, when you have an anorexic, face-eating clown chasing children, there's some inherent drama to that. But when you have that same thing and the victims are adults who are like 35 and 40 and already lived their lives and, already know how to defend themselves and who they are, it's just not as scary. It doesn't have the same impact. And I'm wondering how they're going to try to circumvent that in the sequel. I think it probably won't. I think it's going to be a lesser sequel just by design, because the adult part of the book was certainly inferior to the part with the kids. But you never know. This one surprised me. The sequel surprised me, but I don't really have high expectations for it. So that's it. Those are my thoughts on it. I thought it was quite enjoyable. Probably one of the better movies from a mainstream company to come out this year. And if you haven't seen it, well, you can go see it if you want. There's lots of ways to go do so, including some that are not legal. But we're not talking about those. We don't encourage that. That's bad. But if you did, you'd probably enjoy it, because it's a good movie. Alright, those are my thoughts on it. And hopefully, like I said, just to wrap up, I really, really hope this is the start of a trend, because this is making a lot of money. Early in the year, you had Split make a lot of money, you had Get Out make a lot of money. Maybe, just maybe, we're seeing the end of the overwrought and just completely annoying and played out superhero genre, and seeing the reemergence of hardcore mainstream R-rated horror, because, the idea of God-men saving society, that's such a post-Obama idea, right? I mean, it's such a throwback to 2009. We're over that. We're a new society. We're in the Trump era. We don't want to see people being saved. We want to see people, specifically young white people, getting chewed and eaten by supernatural monsters. And hopefully we'll have a whole lot more of that at theaters, because, man, is it more entertaining watching Thor. That's for sure. Well, that's it. Thoughts on it. Feel free to throw in your own 2 cents. I might care and I might not, but as far as I'm concerned, this it is not S-H-I-T, if you get my drift.